Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 17th of July, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And from Damascus, Vanessa Beeley. Now we're going to get kicked off with, of course, the state opening of Parliament, the King's speech. It was deeply engaging for anybody that watched it. So let's just run through the key points here. So they're going to focus, the new Labour government apparently is going to focus on illegal migration. I'll explain why illegal is in bold in a minute. Online safety, of course, we talked about that on Monday. Energy. Railways, they're going to renationalise the railways, but they're not going to buy back the shares. They're going to wait for the contracts to expire and then basically take control back. So that's going to be another public-private partnership, undoubtedly. Devolution, planning, we'll come on to these in a second. Mental health and homeschooling are, I suppose, the key ones. But if we look at the migration situation first, here is a graph from 1991 up to date. The red line there being the number of people that have come into the country. So that's basically a rolling annual quantity, and then the green line being the number of people that have left the country, and the grey line being the net migration. And if we look at the peak there, which is 1.2 million people, so this is in June 2023. So this is the figure of people that came into the country between June 2022 and June 2023, 1.2 million people. And of those, 52,530 were considered to be illegal migrants. So my question is, if migration is an issue for most people, then why is Nigel Farage, why is everybody focusing on illegal or so-called irregular migration? It's the regular migration, which is the really having the major impact on population in the UK. But Labour Party continuing with the same narrative. We mentioned online safety on Monday. Labour will build on the Online Safety Act, they said in their manifesto. And before the election, they had said that they absolutely supported the idea of legal but harmful. Now, if you remember, this was the concept that speech on the internet, which was legal but was viewed as being harmful, should be censored. Well, they are intending to bring this back. Charles is going to be covering a little bit on energy in a minute, but of course we also mentioned on Monday the setting up of the so-called mission control for clean power 2030. Charles will be covering how they're going to implement this later on in the programme. But just to comment on this briefly, the King's speech says, asked for a trader to see legislation to create GB Energy. Now, a couple of interesting points about that. GB Energy will be based in Scotland. But he goes on to say, a confused attempt to set up a nationalised energy company. Oddly, it will neither generate power nor sell it, but instead designed to pass on to taxpayers projects private sector decided are not viable. This may be true, but I think it's not the whole story. I think, again, we're looking at public-private partnerships in anger here. And so we keep an eye on this to see how that develops. Mental health was mentioned, and particularly of interest, and we've got to keep our eyes out for this. They're talking about the amending the ways that people can be sectioned, or the terms under which people can be sectioned. It's not clear to me yet, and I haven't seen very many comments about it in various media sources, what exactly that means. So that's another one we've got to keep an eye on. And then, of course, we've got the question of education, and you're going to have to remind me the name of the Education Secretary.
Bridget Phillipson.
Bridget Phillipson. It's on screen, for goodness sake. Okay. Right. Anyway, she was giving a speech before the election. Again, it's on the Labour list if anybody is in the slightest bit interested in going to see the pantomime. But the key point about here, the usual rhetoric about raising educational standards and so on. But it does look, Charles, like they are going to implement a national register of homeschoolers. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, it seems so. I mean, it's yet another instance where the net has been cast wide, in effect, to capture people who are not being educated in a correct manner. Therefore, the parents have, in effect, abrogated responsibility. But of course, what they really mean to do is to capture everybody within this net, including all the homeschoolers who are giving perfectly sufficient or more than a better education than the state might be putting on. So it's really a sort of smokescreen, I think, to bring under control those that are seeking to operate outside the government's tentacles.
And another issue mentioned was devolution. So let's listen to Angela Rayner from a day or two ago speaking about this.
Well, first of all, this is an opportunity for those councils that haven't had a devolution package to really get on board, and I hope that they'll take up that offer and we can devolve things like skills, housing, planning and employment support to really kickstart what's happening in their local area. As the Prime Minister set out, those with skin in the game are at the forefront of really making the change, and for us to get that growth across the whole of the country, we know that we have to work in partnership with local authorities, with mayors, and to really kickstart our economy everywhere. You'll have noticed that I changed the department name to put local government right at the heart of it again. You know, these are local authorities provide some of the most critical services to people every single day, and I recognise that. I recognise the challenge that they've faced over the last 14 years, and that's why I want to put them on stable footing for the future and really bring them around the table to tackle some of the inequalities and the things that are holding them back.
So the question is this nationalisation of local authorities? Because we know that many local authorities in major financial difficulties at the moment and effectively bankrupt. But of course, this whole devolution agenda has been going on for quite a long time. It's part of Agenda 21. And again, if you haven't picked up a copy of Your Life in Their Hands, please do so from the UK Column Shop, because we explain the devolution process and how that's changed over the last 20 or 30 years and why it's being done. It is part of Agenda 21 and therefore Agenda 2030. And they're probably not going to stop there. They're also talking about setting up councils of the type that Ben Rubin has been speaking about with a view to replacing the House of Lords. They're certainly talking about getting rid of the remaining hereditary peers. So any independents or non-party political members of the House of Lords will go, and so on. And there's a big discussion to be had on the House of Lords and so on, but that's for another time. And the other thing that was mentioned that I just wanted to throw into the mix here is they were very, very clear that while Britain will stay within NATO and will support NATO till its dying breath, there is renewed momentum into building a European defence capability and a new treaty being talked about, which is effectively going right back to the whole European Defence Union agenda that we were speaking about in 2016, 2017, 2018, up until Brexit. So that policy has not disappeared. But Charles, what is the situation then with defence/war in general? Because there's a review coming.
There absolutely is. Yes, another one. And this is really prefixed with what Brian and Mike indeed have been talking about, certainly with regard to the new government and John Healey, the Defence Minister, effectively talking about not only the defence of the United Kingdom, beginning with the defence of Ukraine, as though there is some existential threat to the United Kingdom because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, but also that you, as a member of the population, are too stupid to understand exactly what's going on. However, they are going to set it out for us, and they've commissioned a new strategic defence review. And if this gives you the sense of déjà vu, that will be because some of the people involved in it this time round are the same as last time. So here we see effectively the press release on the government website, and they talk about it requiring a new type of review. Of course, the last sort of comparable one was in 2010, the Strategic Defence and Security Review in the Cameron coalition government. But here we have it being led by, well, effectively being led by the Defence Secretary, John Healey, but really underlying that by Lord Robertson, Fiona Hill and General Richard Barrons. So we'll go through them one by one. The first thing to say about Robertson, of course, is that he was there in 98 for the Strategic Defence Review of the then Blair government. And since then, he's been involved in a number of different places, but most significantly BP, where in actual fact he's been a special advisor with regard to Russian investments, interestingly, but also he has been involved with the United States-based Cohen Group, set up by William Cohen, the former American Defense Secretary, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's very obvious which way we are looking with regard to this defence review. Also, I thought I'd point out that The Guardian here reporting back in 99 when Tony Blair nominated Robertson to go for the Secretary General of NATO job, he said if George gets the job, he can be replaced as Defence Secretary without too much trouble, effectively saying that he wasn't perhaps going to be the best person for that job. Now, the reason I mentioned Blair is that we've looked at this again in the past, but the Institute for Global Change, of course, is very much heating up their defence rhetoric, and they've recently had their Reimagining Defence conference and new capabilities. So that would be the time to mention the appointment of Nick Carter, former head of the armed forces here, and his connections to Helsing Defence and their cyber, AI and drone capabilities. So the sort of the theme of vested interests here is a very, very strong one. Then we've got Fiona Hill, the presidential advisor to the White House 2017 to 2019 under Donald Trump. And of course, bearing in mind that the likely bet now, especially in light of what's happened, is that Trump might well be in the chair again later this year. She, of course, has the contacts. But just to give an idea of what sort of a view she has on defence and the current situation now, this is an article from Politico in February 2022 saying, yes, he would, meaning that Putin would absolutely use nuclear weapons. Her sort of summary of what she stated in that interview that was transcribed into an article, she believes that there's been a long-term policy failure by NATO, in effect, not to contain Russia and stand up to Russia. She believes that Russia will not stop at Ukraine, that they really are after a territorial conquering of other parcels of land, that there needs to be an international response to stop Russia, i.e. beyond NATO, beyond the EU, an international response. She absolutely believes that Putin wants to use nuclear weapons, and she has gone as far as directly comparing Putin to Hitler. So that's how she sees things. And of course, she is going to be very influential. I should have mentioned also that that set out in the government press release, it was made very clear that this wasn't going to be something that just happened within government. It was also going to be without. And we've already looked at some of the vested interests here and indeed the connections. So we should be under no illusion that this is going to involve an awful lot of interested parties well outside the arena of government. Now, the next person to look at is Barrons, General Sir Richard Barrons, who was commander of the joint, my apologies, I forget the previous job he held in the army, Commander Joint Force Command, that's what it was. Anyway, you won't be surprised to know that he is now involved with Universal Defence and Security Solutions, so he is, in effect, in the defence industry, and worth noting that he is specialising very much on AI, the cyber part of it, as well as space, which of course we've talked about recently, and indeed the modernisation of defence. Right. And Mike's just got another point on this.
Yes, the other point to make about General Sir Richard Barrons, of course, he's a personal friend of Chris Donnelly, and therefore, and I believe he was part of the Institute for Statecraft at the time, so he is an absolute Russophobe.
Yeah, absolutely. And Russophobe was the tag, really, that I should have applied to Fiona Hill. I mean, obviously, in the mainstream, she's referred to as a Russia specialist, but these days it's increasingly hard to find a Russia specialist that is not, in actual fact, a Russophobe. So these are a sort of snapshot into the people that are going to be leading this defence review and the likely direction it's going to go in, which is going to be a very close tie to the United States and a sole focus on being part of NATO that is pursuing a proxy war against Russia by keeping, in all likelihood, keeping Ukraine at arm's length because of the Article 5 responsibility to become involved directly with Russia should NATO become, should Ukraine become a member of NATO. So what we'll do now is we'll just look back at sort of how we've got here and the situation we are in. And I'm going to mention Patrick Sanders, General Patrick Sanders, who has just finished as head of the British Army and joins that very long list of generals who says all the important stuff the moment he's left the army. He has just said that he believes that the British Army is in such a parlous state that they might be able to fight a small war for approximately 1 month, but no more than that. And I've put the picture on screen of Keir Starmer in his probably not particularly well-ironed combat. So he's getting amongst it, and he's, being pushed on by people like Sanders speaking out against this. But of course, whilst Sanders's views should be taken, well, certainly with perhaps a pinch of salt, they should also be viewed in the context of the suggestions of both national service and conscription, because in effect the provocation of response is meant to be that we are in a situation where there is an existential threat to the United Kingdom, and in order to counter that and put Ukraine first and the UK first, people need to get behind defence and to support it by putting young men and women in the firing line. So that's why I mentioned Sanders in particular. But really, we have to look at who benefits from this. And this is from the Financial Times this morning, showing the 5-year chart for the all-share aerospace and defence industries, with the red arrows showing, first of all, when the Ukraine conflict started in February 2022, and then Gaza in October 2023. And it's very clear that all of these people who are going to be involved in this review are benefiting in some way from the upward trajectory of that graph. And that really is a huge part of what it's about. So also where we are now with regard to the integrated operating concept, the IOC, which again, we've talked about a lot before, but I put it previously that we are somewhere between the third and fourth stages, constrain being proactive and assertive. It may involve the use of force, and of course the next step being war fighting. So, Mike, I'm sure you've got some follow-up comments to make, and we'll keep an eye on how this does go. But that they're saying it's going to be conducted at pace and will be delivered early in 2025.
Yes, you mentioned the integrated operating concept. We've got to always keep in mind that was the military doctrine where the UK openly declared that its own population is potentially as much an enemy as any foreign population.
Yeah, very, very good point.
Yes. So let's welcome Vanessa to the programme. And Vanessa, you've got a bit more on Donald Trump.
Yes, I just wanted to cover the rather dramatic event. I'm not going to go into huge details about what I consider to be the huge anomalies in the entire narrative. But I just wanted to point out, the idea that this might be either a structural deep event, and we can see the definition of that from the wiki slide, if possible. Which is basically, it's effectively deep state creating an environment in which the political landscape or enormous changes to society can be brought about. You then also, of course, have the state crime against democracy, which is the current state carrying out a crime in order to bring about certain events. So I would recommend watching Kevin Ryan, Genocide and Empire, Identifying Structural Deep Events and State Crimes Against Democracy in Real Time, to better understand how this might tie in with what has just happened in the United States. Now, two of the main reasons that I consider that this could have been some kind of orchestrated event is the speed with which Trump paraphernalia appeared on market stalls and on social media and across the board following the alleged attempted assassination, including T-shirts, posters, etc. And the in unison, very jingoistic, emotional messaging being put out by certain high-level social media commentators and media people, including Tucker Carlson and Scott Ritter. And then these kind of videos that suddenly also appeared promoting Trump as some kind of cult figure and very much appealing to the Christian Zionist and the Christian market in the United States, depicting him as having been saved by God from death. So let's just have a quick look or dip into one of these videos.
I'm going to look you in the eyes and I'm going to tell you the future. It's an American story, and that's why Americans are going to love it. People are going to build you up. God, are they going to? Because when you're great and new, we love you. Man, we'll build you into something that doesn't even exist. You're going to change the fucking world. But you know what? Once they've built you as high as they possibly can, they're going to tear you back down. It's the most predictable pattern. We build you into something that doesn't exist, and that means you have to try to be that thing.
I'm not sure if I recommend watching the full video, but anyway, that gives you some idea of the messaging that's now really permeating social media and media, certainly center and right. And all of the, what I call the America First crowd are now absolutely on fire. As I said, very jingoistic messaging. Donald Trump is going to end all wars. Donald Trump is going to prevent the escalation of nuclear war with Russia. But there's almost complete silence on what Donald Trump might actually do to prevent the ongoing genocide in Gaza. That suddenly seems to have completely dropped off the radar for many of these commentators, although they're pushing back on that commentary and observation from some of us. So I want to now just have a quick look at who Donald Trump is, what his previous administration achieved or didn't achieve in the Middle East. So first of all, Donald Trump is a Zionist fan. He's been given more than 1 million by AIPAC, by the pro-Israel lobby. If we look at Trump's messaging, particularly towards Israel and the Middle East, of course, he said very clearly we should have kept the oil in Iraq, so no condemnation there of the US policy to invade Iraq. And then a very quick video showing him explaining why he was keeping US military in Syria.
Okay, so we want to worry about our things. We're keeping the oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil.
So we left troops behind only for the oil, not to fight ISIS, of course, which is what the general pretext for the United States military footprint inside Syria, occupying Syrian resources in the northeast. He then went on to say, after 52 years, it's time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is of critical strategic and security importance to the state of Israel and regional stability. Of course, Israel takes 30% of its water resources from the occupied Golan Heights, which of course is Syrian territory. Message from Faris Shahabi there, basically saying you will never have stability in the region while you allow Israel to occupy our territory and to cause exodus from our territory. He then recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and ordered the US embassy to move. And in fact, Netanyahu even called for the new Golan settlement named after Trump. He also brought in, under his administration, the Abraham Accords, claiming that it was the dawn of a new Middle East. He celebrated the Abraham Accords with White House signing ceremony. Of course, the Abraham Accords is recognized by the majority of the Palestinian nationalist movements as being a complete betrayal of their movement. And to a degree, of course, it's bringing in the success of the Greater Israel Project by aligning Israel with particularly the Gulf states and Egypt. And then let's have a look at a recent video from Trump where he's actually pushing for Israel to go harder in Gaza.
So, number one, they have to finish the job. Israel has to finish that job. They have to finish it quickly, strongly, and they have to get back to life again because it's taking too long. They have to finish the job.
You're saying go in, win, and finish.
Gotta win. Gotta win. Israel, they don't have the backing that they once had.
You'll give it to them.
Yeah, I'm good. But they don't have the backing. Even Schumer has become like a Palestinian. Chuck Schumer, Jewish, always strong for Israel. He's become like a Palestinian.
I mean, quite incredible that there is no mention, as I said, of the Israeli genocide, of Palestinians in Gaza and in the occupied territories, and also the use of the term Palestinian as a racist, disparaging label. And he does it again in the debate with Biden, if we just quickly roll that.
Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
So they should finish the job. One assumes that means the full ethnic cleansing of Gaza and Palestinian territory. Then let's have a look at J.D. Vance. Trump has selected him as running mate after a last-minute push from his son. So let's have a look at J.D. Vance, again, backed by the Zionists and by AIPAC, 167,000 there. In, I think that's 2022, J.D. Vance, I will be a strong advocate for Israel in the Senate. And then let's have a look at Vance's messaging almost immediately regarding Iran. So if we roll the video.
A lot of people recognize that we need to do something with Iran, but not these weak little bombing runs. If you're going to punch the Iranians, you punch them hard, and that's what he did when he took out Soleimani.
Of course, Soleimani, the commander of the IRGC, who defeated ISIS in Iraq and Syria, effectively was assassinated by Trump. And then let's have a look at what Vance has to say about the Abraham Accords that I mentioned.
Maybe the most important diplomatic breakthrough of the Trump administration was the Abraham Accords. If you want to check Iran, the way to do it is to, one, withdraw their oil money, which, of course, Joe Biden's been bad about, but you've also got to enable the Israelis and the Sunni Arab states to work together and actually provide a counterbalance to Iran. Joe Biden has done nothing. You have the infrastructure there, sitting there, to weaken Iran, to strengthen our ally Israel. Joe Biden's done nothing with it. Donald Trump would reinvigorate it. I think one.
So I don't know about you, but I understand this as very clear messaging that the destruction of the Middle East is part of Trump's policy, finally, with a war with Iran. And I think it's also important to look at the Christian Zionist element and the Zionist element within Trump's administration and following. And I do recommend that everybody re-watches if they have already seen it, and watches again if they haven't, or watches if they haven't. Dark Crusade, a look at the origins of Christian Zionists with Clifford Kirikoff, an interview that you did, Mike. But I think, all of these so-called America First promoters that are on social media now and in the media claiming that Trump is going to put America first. I actually remember in 2021 when everybody was saying, oh my God, we have to have something better than Trump. And so they voted in Biden. Now we have, oh my God, we have to have something better than Biden. So we'll bring back in Trump. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, goldfish politics as far as I can see, keeps going round in the same cycle. But I think the dangers are with Trump and his administration is that we're going to see a ramping up of support for Israel and for the Zionist agenda and hegemony in the region, which will mean the destruction of Palestine, potentially Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and eventually Iran. So while the America First crew are claiming that Trump is better because he will prevent a nuclear war with Russia, they are effectively ignoring the potential threat for West Asia. And of course, America First for me means Israel first. That's the end of it. And it's no different with Biden to Trump. Oh, can't hear you.
Two sides of the same coin. And okay, Trump is saying we need to end the war in Ukraine. Russia's not really the target. But he is absolutely focused on China. He wants to take that argument into the South China Sea. And into Iran. So Iran has been on the US hit list for so many years now, and that hasn't changed. And Trump is not a peacemaker, and that's the key point here. And for the people that are, fighting or at least arguing against the Ukraine war, but are claiming support for Trump, this is missing the point, I think. We could talk about a little bit more about that in extra. So thank you for that, Vanessa. Okay, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go. The options to help us out there, £5 a month for a membership. If you join us as a member, you can watch Extra, which we stream following the news every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, as well as taking part in the community. So please join us if you possibly can. We are being censored, continuing to be censored, and if you can therefore help be the algorithm, as it were, and share our material and some sort of sidestep the limitations that the algorithms on the various platforms provide, then please do that. ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk are the places to go for that, and you could pick something up at the UK Column shop. Now, a couple of interviews. First of all, Laura Desmarais. Charles?
That's right. Yeah, no, that's now up on the website, went out last week, but I really would encourage you to listen to it. We've spoken a lot about the doctrine of the lesser magistrates and interposition. And Laura, as a registered nurse, has been going to county commissioners and appealing to them to stop the mRNA vaccines due to the harm they've been causing. She had no legal background, but she's achieved amazing success just through sheer determination. So I really would encourage you to listen to that, because she is actually going out there and doing it.
An inspiration, absolutely. And Cheryl Granger taking on the MHRA and asking, are they harm enablers? That is up on the website as well. If you haven't seen that, please do have a look at it. And then tomorrow, an interview with John Bedoin. Yes, I think that's how we pronounce it. Talking about death statistics in the United States. Absolutely essential. Everybody watches this if you possibly can. He has managed to get access to millions of death records and looking at for patterns there and discovering patterns there, particularly since the vaccine rollout. So do join 1 p.m. for that tomorrow. Another reminder date for your diary, Saturday the 19th of October 2024, Bristol, UK Column really live. Do come along to that, but keep that date free. Announcements to be made in the next day or two. And where does that take us? Died suddenly?
Yeah, there's going to be an exhibition, an art exhibition in November this year in London, exact location to be decided. But this is to do with the unexplained deaths and the massive rise in excess deaths. It's being coordinated by an artist, a very good portraitist, Jake Fern. So if you'd like to know more about it, you'd like to help, or you have stories that relate to people who have died suddenly and excess death, please get in touch with Jake. I've mistyped his email. Sorry, it's Jake H. Fern. So disregard the one that's written in big black letters. It's Jake H. Fern. I will make sure that's redone for the next thing. Jake, apologies, but you will get him if you go to his website, which is jakefern.co.uk. Jake, J-A-K-E, Fern, F-E-R-N.co.uk. So that's going to be a terrific exhibition in November, but he would like help with it and for people to come forward with their stories. So please get in touch with him.
So the email address is jakehfern@yahoo.co.uk. Okay, so we were talking about energy with respect to the King's speech. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is, having talked about energy and climate and defence last week, the boundary has been pushed yet further, and the Royal College of Physicians, believe it or not, have just released a document called the Green Physician Toolkit, which looks like it's designed for children. And certainly the intent is that patients of GPs are to be treated like children. So here we see that understanding the link between climate change and health in the UK is the first bit. So you have to understand how these links between health and climate affect themselves. And these have been broken down into 4 easy steps with little pictures. So the burning of fossil fuels increases land temperatures and air temperatures, causes extreme weather events, melts sea ice and glaciers, warms the oceans, and creates air pollution. But it's already impacting health. And when we consider Jake's forthcoming exhibition of Died Suddenly, interesting to note, therefore, there are now 3,271 excess deaths attributable to climate change somehow in the summer of 2022, and thousands of them annually. Of course, this goes back to the mental health that Mike was talking about in the King's speech, depression, anxiety and PTSD amongst the populations exposed to flooding, which of course Debbie has spoken about at great length on a regular basis. And then we see the groups that are more vulnerable. So this suggestion that there are vulnerable groups that need to be helped. And we see there, if you can't see the screen, there's a picture of a man with brown skin and wearing a face mask for reasons that are not entirely clear, but presumably to do with air pollution. But these vulnerable groups are older people, infants and children, people with pre-existing conditions, coastal and low-lying populations, people experiencing homelessness, and it's going to get worse. That's what the Health Security Agency project. They say that heat-related deaths could increase by 580%. Now, that is a figure plucked from thin air. An increase in cold-related deaths, 61% increase people at flooding risk by 2050. Anyway, you get the idea. This is very much aimed at, physicians in the first instance, but obviously for the public to be viewed, and the whole thing has been infantilized to a staggering degree. Anyway, GPs are given guidance on how to actually talk to the people, but the way this is termed is that they are described as being uniquely placed as a trusted member of the community. Now, I think after what happened in 2020 and beyond, I would say that that is a waning reputation, but nonetheless, those that do still go to GPs will be helped within their communities to understand how climate change will affect their health and how to protect themselves. So it's an absolute abuse of trust that they should now be asked to talk about something that they are not trained in, and that indeed the science is certainly not settled on. Anyway, the WHO now very much involved in climate change, and they have some key points to talk to patients about. They say keep the message simple and repeat it often. Well, we've heard and seen the effects of that before in 2020 and beyond. Focus on human health, understand the local context, don't use jargon. Well, okay. Empower people to make good decisions about their health. It's looking increasingly like one such decision might not be to go to the GP in the first place. Anyway, talk about the health benefits of climate action. So this is sort of, in effect, galvanizing people into a state of political activism, which is an extraordinary expansion of the remit of a health practitioner. To tell stories to connect with people, and I think this is absolutely critical to it. They don't mean it in this way, but I would say that telling stories is absolutely what this is all about. Avoid polarizing languages, talk about climate change during extreme weather events. So there we go, conflate things that may otherwise not have any bearing on one another. And the biggest one, to the last point, in bold, don't debate the science. And there's quite a good reason for that. And just to recap, it's because the science effectively says that there is a belief that the approximately 3% of emissions, of overall carbon dioxide emissions over the course of a year that are created by man's activities, included, of course, farming and all the other things that are being demonized at the minute, that 3% of the overall carbon dioxide emitted is going to affect the total amount of carbon dioxide, which is 0.04% of the overall atmosphere. And it will change the climate, it will change the weather, it will heat up the world. That is the science upon which this is based. So it's very important to consider that whenever anyone says don't debate the science. I would say it's perfectly clear why not. Anyway, we'll go on and have a look at Gavi now, the sort of Bill Gates spin-off vaccine business, I suppose, for want of a better word. And they say no vaccine for climate change. When this used to be a joke in 2020 that there was going to be a vaccine for climate change, they are actually now sort of talking about it. There is no vaccine for climate change and never will be. However, there are multiple readily available health interventions and prevention measures. So, as I say, we've now got this association not just between defence and climate, but also very much between medicine and climate, and there seems to be no end to it. We've talked also in the King's speech about the push towards net zero and how the whole planning space is to be reshaped around this belief that climate and energy is completely interlinked, climate and defence is interlinked, climate and medicine is interlinked. And so I just go to a small announcement made yesterday about the Seneca energy farm, which has been going to take up 2,500 acres in East Anglia, and really just the amazing disregard for democracy here. We see that local communities are continuing to be given the opportunity of being involved. They were able to participate in this examination, and full consideration to all local views was given. So just to wind up, we see here from the Nuclear Energy Initiative, I can't remember what NEI exactly stands for, but they talk about the comparison between these technologies. Wind farms require up to 360 times as much land area to produce the same amount of energy, and PV solar requires up to 75 times the land area. So that's where we sit with it. And it is quite extraordinary the amount, the Labour government were not joking when they were talking about change. We'll get into the detail of all the planning that's going to be completely upended over the next few weeks.
Okay, let's quick change of topic. I want to bring this article from the BBC on screen. The headline is MI5 does not have to confirm abusive man was a spy. Well, what are they saying here? This is basically a domestic violence case. So let's bring this up. The security service can continue to neither confirm nor deny whether a man who attacked his girlfriend with a machete was an MI5 agent, judges have ruled. In 2022, a BBC News investigation established through multiple sources that the man, known as X for legal reasons, was an MI5 agent. He used his MI5 role to coercively control Beth, not her real name, his ex-partner. He was physically and sexually abusive and was filmed threatening to kill her and then attacking her with a machete. Now, she is asking for the fact of whether he is an MI5 agent to be brought to the trial whenever there is a trial in a few months' time. This is not clear that it's going to be permitted. Certainly MI5 is refusing to confirm or deny. So she's bringing the case to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. Now, they call themselves an independent judicial body. They say we provide the right of redress to anyone who believes they've been a victim of unlawful action by a public authority using covert intelligence techniques, investigative techniques. We also consider complaints about conduct by or on behalf of the UK Intelligence Services, Security Service, the Secret Intelligence Service, and GCHQ, and so on. Now, of course, their hearings are all non-public. They can either be completely secret, in which case no evidence is shared with the complainant, or they can be just held in private, in which case evidence is shared with the complainant. But the reason this particular topic was of interest to me was just to remind everybody again of this piece of legislation. It was a bill, it's now an act, it is law now. Covert Human Intelligence Sources (Criminal Conduct Act. And just remind everybody of the range of organisations who are entitled to authorise criminal behaviour by their so-called agents. So police forces, National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office, intelligence agencies, Her Majesty's Forces, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, Department of Health, the Home Office, Ministry of Justice, Competition and Markets Authority, the Environment Agency, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Food Standards Agency, and the Gambling Commission. So the key point that I'd like to make here is, is there no public interest in this case or any other case in the public knowing whether criminality was being committed by a member of the security services, MI5 or whomever? Now, my understanding is that in this case, MI5 has even removed evidence from the police evidence stores. So this becomes really tricky situation. And, if they continue in maintaining this idea of non-disclosure of whether somebody is a member of a security service or not, particularly in this case, which is effectively a domestic violence case, it's not related to any intelligence gathering work. If they're prepared to do that in this case, then what else are they covering up? And I think it's extremely dangerous when we're in the situation that we have no oversight. Now, we can talk in extra, Charles, because obviously you have been in the police, about whether or how much of a problem it is for agencies if they can't behave in certain ways if they're evidence gathering. But we'll keep that for extra, that conversation. But let's move on to this then. Another issue that the Labour government is facing is overcrowding in our prisons. And of course, they're already announced that they're going to start releasing prisoners.
They have, yes. So, here we go again, because this, of course, is a topic that's been effectively in the news since the Victorian era, where the number of people that are effectively consigned to internment is increased. But here we go. The comment from Charlie Taylor, the Chief Inspector of Prisons, just last week. And of course, it's concerned really with the political capital that's attempting to be scored on this basis. But within his comment, he has effectively said that there was it was at a point where no decision could really be taken without any risk, which I suppose is a fairly obvious part of decision-making process. But this notion of risk and people being described as risky offenders. So the idea is that people would be released at the point of having served 40% of their sentence. Exactly how they get to that seems a little bit of nuance in that. But of course, the effect that is to be borne by the prison service and probation will be the massive increase in their workload as they try and determine how this is to be affected and then actually do it. Taylor then says it's to break the cycle of reoffending and to protect the public from future harm. Of course, all perhaps noble goals, but nonetheless, they do deserve further investigation and scrutiny. And just prior to this, on the 8th of July, the House of Commons Library produced statistics on the prison population. But I think the first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is how wildly inaccurate the government are when it comes to forecasting this sort of thing. So it might not be particularly clear, but there's a dark green line that shows the actual prison population, how it's fluctuated over the last 10 years or so. And then a load of grey lines, which are their forecasts, which possibly by general trend go in roughly the right direction, but they are still quite significantly far off what the total has turned out to be.
Is this dotted line all the distance that they're intending to put in prison?
Well, exactly. You see, this is a very good question, and it comes back to the cost of what, talking about the Victorian period of massive prison building projects and whether or not that cost can be justified. But then the other thing to look at is the offences by prison group, because I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the reason prisons are full is because more people are doing more criminal things. Now, that's not necessarily and probably more likely to be not the case. It is, however, an indicator of how police and courts are behaving with regard to particular demographics or particular offences. So we see here, as a good example, the number of youths, the number of juveniles, 15 to 17, who are in prison by percentage for violence against persons, criminal offences concerning violence, which is well over 50%, so an enormous percentage of them. Of course, for adults, the big ones are violence against persons, sexual offences, and drugs. But of course, it's introducing this notion of risk if they are back on the street. Now, I used this slide a few months ago, and we talked about reoffending rates. This is out of date data, as it often is with government, but nonetheless, we see that there's a overall reoffending rate of 33%, but for those having a sentence of less than 12 months, a reoffending rate of 56%, which is absolutely staggering. And we have to question the whole sort of area of criminal justice. But we have from the Institute of Government a performance tracker, and again, a graph, statistics sort of being used to demonstrate that something went right and then wrong again. So the change of methodology in terms of violence within prisons. And of course, then we see a sharp drop in 2020. So they ascribe this, well, first of all, some of the issues in prisons are that prisons are in many cases kept in cells for up to 22 hours per day. Female self-harm has gone up by nearly 120% since 2019. Half the prison staff at the moment are reckoned to have less than 5 years experience. And the sharp increase in prisoners, which again could have been absolutely determined at the time, was due to the backlog from the lockdown periods, the internment in 2020 and 2021. Magistrates have had their maximum sentencing increased to 12 months and then reduced back down to 6 months. And staff believe, this is an interesting one, staff believe that violence is reduced by confinement. So effectively, the decrease that was seen in the lockdowns has been used as a way in which to suggest that actually this is a sensible thing to do with prisoners because it reduces the workload of the prison service and it contains violence within the prisons. Now, I want to also make mention in the King's speech of the push of the expression of anti-extremist rhetoric and the work in particular that Lord Walney has been doing on this, and the suggestion that there are many, many people who are effectively worthy of prison time, Sam Melia being one that we've highlighted. But now what? What are they going to do? And the reason I talk about this is because we have a defence review going on. We're talking about conscription. We're talking about national service. What is going to happen to people that need prison spaces, or we're told need prison spaces, but they don't have prison spaces for?
Very good question. Okay, thank you for that, Charles. Vanessa, let's come back to you then and give us an update on the situation in Gaza.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that in the last hour, the headline at CNN is Secret Service ramped up security after receiving intel of Iranian plot to assassinate Trump. So I think that's quite a good follow-on from my Trump sector. So I want to point out that the genocide in Gaza is ongoing. In fact, it's increasing, if that's even possible, with some fairly horrendous massacres and events this week. So clearly Netanyahu feels no threat either from Biden or from the potential of an incoming Trump administration. This is a report in Al Mayadeen, 320 cases of severe burns in 48 hours in Gaza. Israel is using prohibited weapons against Palestinians in Gaza, resulting in up to 320 cases of severe burns, Gaza's government media office said. Of course, we know that Israel has historically used white phosphorus. White phosphorus, if it comes into contact with human flesh, it literally melts the flesh away from the bone, and it's very difficult to stop the spread of that burn. Martyred and injured Palestinians were brought into hospitals in Gaza with severe burns due to Israel's usage of internationally prohibited weapons. In a statement on Monday, these are unconventional and internationally prohibited weapons banned for use against humans and mostly American-made, adding that the bodies were severely burned due to the Israeli occupation's army's use of these weapons. And then I just wanted to show a very quick video. There have actually been 2 massacres in Mawazi camp near Khan Yunis, which was designated a safe zone by Israel for the refugees from the north and other areas of Gaza to go to and to set up their camp cities. I'm not going to show anything particularly distressing regarding dead bodies, but this is the actual capture of the first Israeli strike on Mawazi camp, which is crowded with tens of thousands of refugees. So let's roll this.
يا رب يا ساتر يا رب يا رب قصفوا مربع كامل في مواصي خان يونس. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل.
سلطان هادي سلطان سلطان
It's been pointed out that the 2,000-pound Mk-84 was used in this attack, and at least 5 missiles were used against, as I said, a heavily populated civilian encampment. If we look at what the Mk-84 does, it can effectively, it's usually used against heavy machinery, against armored vehicles, against tanks, and against infrastructure. It can create massive craters, and it can basically kill civilians within a range of over 300 meters from the impact point. More than 100 were killed in this attack, and hundreds more were injured. Hospitals overwhelmed trying to deal with them. Since October the 7th, 160 journalists have now been killed by Israel, and of course their families have been targeted during the various assassination attempts. And this is a story that I really wanted to highlight to demonstrate the inhumanity of the Israeli forces in Gaza. A Palestinian with Down syndrome was left to die by Israeli soldiers. This is a report in Middle East Eye after a combat dog attack. Mohammed, who was like a 1-year-old, was separated from his family by the soldiers. And then the dog was basically allowed to maul him. And he was desperately trying to defend himself. If we look at the rest of, or another section of the report, Soldiers expelled everyone from the house except for Mohammed, who was taken to a separate room. Unable to see him, his mother could only guess his fate from the screams as she was forced to leave the area at gunpoint. 7 agonizing days of waiting passed before Israeli troops finally withdrew from Shujaiya. The family rushed back to the apartment on Wednesday. They found Mohammed's decomposing body. People can read that for themselves. But basically, the dog was allowed to maul him to death, a defenseless guy with Down syndrome.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Vanessa, for that. Now, let's end today with this story. This is the Propaganda in Focus website, Piers Robinson's website, or one website that he contributes to at least. The Tragedy of Yulia Skripal. This is an article by Tim Norman. Now, Tim Norman has written an article we've published on the Skripal case. For anybody that doesn't remember, of course, Sergei and Yulia Skripal allegedly poisoned by the Russian government with Novichok, a so-called nerve agent in Salisbury. This was a massive story at the time. So if you just put that back on screen for a second and have a look at some of the text here, it says the effect of Novichok poisoning is an important part of the tragedy of Yulia Skripal, but not because it killed her or her father, because of course it didn't. Rather, Tim says it made them both vanish. Like Yulia, Sergei disappeared after his alleged exposure to and recovery from this deadly nerve agent. And like Yulia, no one can ask Sergei about what happened to them. Now, it is a fact that the last time we mentioned the Skripal case on UK Column News, 1 or 2 people that hadn't been watching UK Column at the time were a little surprised, a little taken aback that we were suggesting that this was a fake event. So if we put that back on screen, we'll look at the next next paragraph here, because this sort of sums up the situation. The military-grade poison, this is Novichok, did not seem to have an effect on either of them, that's Yulia or Sergei, for several hours. Sergei, this is following exposure, Sergei drove them into the city centre where they fed ducks on the River Avon. There they passed quite close by the two, quite close by the 2 Russian secret agents who had poisoned them, as their would-be assassins had apparently decided to take the opportunity to do a bit of window shopping in Salisbury after carrying out their orders, rather than leaving the city immediately. Yulia and Sergei then went to a restaurant and a pub. It was after this, while they were walking in a shopping area of Salisbury called the Maltings, that the nerve agent that had supposedly been separately exposed to a few hours earlier dramatically entered their bloodstreams. They had apparently had time to sit on a public bench in the Maltings as they were almost simultaneously overcome together by its powerful effects. And the article goes on to say, fortunately for them, the British Army's most senior nurse happened to be passing by with her daughter, and they gave Yulia and Sergei first aid. The coincidences here are off the charts. Tim goes on to say this, goes on to talk about Dawn Sturgis, who of course died a couple of days later, and also allegedly poisoned by Novichok having her boyfriend having picked up a perfume bottle apparently, and her thinking that it was perfume. So the article says the Sturgis family have been fighting ever since for an inquest to find out how the events in Salisbury led to Dawn's death. And after Dawn's daughter won legal case against the coroner's initial judgment, the UK government converted the inquest into a public inquiry so that it could hide evidence from them in the name of national security. And this is all well referenced, so do click on the links that are in this article. The article goes on to say the inquiry is due to begin in October 2024, but at an initial hearing on the 21st of June, Jack Holborn, a barrister appointed by UK government to represent Yulia and Sergei in the legal process, stated that Yulia and Sergei feared for their safety if they gave evidence to the inquiry because no security measures are perfect, and giving testimony would cause them distress. So they are apparently not going to be taking part in this inquest, and it is an inquest. And we know from previous inquests that any suggestion that the government would hide evidence from them is absolutely valid. Many questions continued needing to be asked of this incident and the accusation that Russia had carried out a chemical weapons attack on British soil. As I say, Tim Norman wrote this article, which is on the UK Column website some time ago in 2022, the day of the Skripal. If you haven't seen this yet, please go and read it and share it. Now, the point of this article is that it is a timeline of all the mainstream. It's basically showing a timeline of all the mainstream coverage of the Skripal case from the beginning to the end. And what comes across very starkly from this timeline is how ridiculous the official narrative of the whole thing is. So we do recommend that you have a look at that. And another article on the UK Column website that we want to point out is, is not the same one. So apologies for that. Let's see, do we have, no, we don't. So the other one is Alex Thompson's article on Russi, and if you just search on the UK Column website for a Russi web, you will see the article, and do have a look at that one as well. But the question we want to end with, as we always do when we talk about the Skripals, is where are they? They disappeared after this. They've never been heard of or seen again. Some people speculating they're in New Zealand, but nobody really knows for sure. And certainly they don't seem to be making an appearance for the forthcoming inquest. Many, many questions still to be asked on this and answered. But we will have to leave it there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to Charles and Vanessa for joining us. Plenty to talk about in Extra. If you're not a UK Column member, please consider joining therefore us for Extra. And we will see everybody that is on Extra in a couple of minutes, but otherwise see you Friday as usual, 1 p.m. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.